Welcome to Open Books, the most cozy corner of the world. Before we dive into our enchanting bedtime story, don't forget to grab your favorite blanket, find that perfect comfy spot. So, get ready to unwind, relax, and let the magic of storytelling guide you into a world of dreams. Aladdin, written by Hannah Diab in The Arabian Night, tells the story of a poor tailor and his son, Aladdin. Aladdin is portrayed as a careless and idle boy, more interested in playing in the streets than in taking responsibility. Despite the father's death and the mother's tears and prayers, Aladdin does not mend his ways. One day, a stranger approaches Aladdin inquiring about his age and confirming if he is Mustafar the tailor's son. Aladdin, admitting his father's demise, is surprised when the stranger reveals himself as his uncle, a renowned African magician. Excitedly, Aladdin rushes home to inform his mother of this newfound family connection. His mother, initially skeptical, eventually accepts the uncle's presence and prepares a supper to welcome him. The magician, laden with wine and fruit, arrives and expresses familiarity by kissing the spot where Mustafa used to sit. Aladdin's mother is astonished to learn about the existence of her late husband's brother, who had been away for 40 years. The magician offers to help Aladdin by setting up a shop for him with merchandise. The next day, Aladdin is gifted a fine suit of clothes, and the magician takes him around the city to explore its attractions. Following this, the magician leads Aladdin to beautiful gardens outside the city gates. They sit by a fountain, share a cake, and continue their journey toward the mountains. Despite Aladdin's fatigue, the magician captivates him with stories. They reach a narrow valley between two mountains, and the magician reveals his intention to show something wonderful. Requesting Aladdin to gather sticks, the magician kindles a fire and throws a powder onto it, causing the earth to tremble. A square flat stone with a brass ring in the middle is revealed. Aladdin, feeling uneasy, attempts to run, but the magician prevents his escape with a blow. The magician assures Aladdin that beneath the stone lies a treasure meant for him alone. Instructing him to lift the stone using the ring, the magician describes the steps to access the treasure. Despite initial fears, Aladdin complies, and the stone comes up easily, revealing steps leading to 3 large halls. The magician warns Aladdin not to touch anything and describes a garden beyond the halls with fruit trees. Aladdin reaches a niche in a terrace, finding a lighted lamp. Instructed to pour out the oil and bring the lamp to him, Aladdin is given a ring by the magician. Following the magician's guidance, Aladdin finds the treasure as promised, gathering fruit and obtaining the lamp. He stands at the mouth of the cave, ready to embark on the next phase of his adventure. The magician urgently cried out, "Make haste and give me the lamp." Aladdin, however, refused to comply until he was safely out of the cave. Enraged, the magician threw more powder onto the fire, uttered some incantations, and the stone rolled back into its place. It became evident that the man was no uncle of Aladdin's, but a cunning magician who sought a legendary lamp mentioned in his magic books. This lamp was said to grant immense power, and the magician intended to use Aladdin to obtain it, planning to kill him afterward. Aladdin spent 2 days in darkness, lamenting his fate. Eventually, in desperation, he clasped his hands in prayer, inadvertently rubbing the ring the magician had overlooked. Instantly, a colossal and fearsome genie emerged, declaring itself the slave of the ring and ready to obey Aladdin's commands. Fearlessly, Aladdin requested to be delivered from the cave, and the earth opened to release him. As his eyes adjusted to the light, he returned home but fainted upon reaching the threshold. Upon regaining consciousness, Aladdin recounted the events to his mother, showing her the lamp and the garden fruits, which were, in fact, precious stones. Aladdin asked for some food, but his mother, having only spun a little cotton, suggested selling it. Aladdin, opting to sell the lamp instead, watched as his mother began to clean it. Suddenly, a hideous genie appeared, asking what she desired. Fainting, she wished for food, and Aladdin, seizing the opportunity, summoned the genie with the ring, who returned with a splendid feast. After enjoying the meal, Aladdin sold the silver plates provided by the genie to sustain themselves. When they ran out of plates, Aladdin sought the genie's help again, receiving a new set. Thus, they lived comfortably for many years. One day, Aladdin heard a royal decree instructing everyone to stay indoors while the princess went to and from the baths. Intrigued, he hid behind the bath's door and caught a glimpse of the veiled princess, instantly falling in love with her. Aladdin, deeply in love, decided to ask for the princess's hand in marriage. His mother initially laughed at the idea, but he eventually convinced her to carry his request to the Sultan. Armed with a napkin containing magic fruits from the enchanted garden, she approached the Sultan, who initially ignored her. For a week, she stood in the same place during council sessions. On the 6th day, the Sultan, noticing her persistence, instructed his vizier to call her forward. Upon the vizier's signal, she approached the throne and knelt before the Sultan. He encouraged her to speak freely, promising forgiveness in advance. She then revealed her son's intense love for the princess. "I pleaded with him to forget her," she said, "but in vain. He threatened to do something desperate if I didn't go and request your majesty for the hand of the princess. Now, I implore you not only to forgive me but also my son, Aladdin." The Sultan inquired kindly about the contents of the napkin, prompting her to unfold the jewels and present them. Thunderstruck, he turned to the vizier and questioned, "What do you say? Should I not bestow the princess on one who values her at such a price?" The vizier, who desired the princess for his own son, urged the Sultan to withhold her for 3 months, during which he hoped his son could present a richer gift. The Sultan agreed, instructing Aladdin's mother that though he consented to the marriage, she must not appear before him again for 3 months. Aladdin patiently waited for nearly 3 months. However, after 2 had passed, his mother, going into the city to buy oil, discovered everyone rejoicing and asked about the celebration. The response was, "Do you not know that the son of the Grand Vizier is to marry the Sultan's daughter tonight?" Breathless, she rushed to inform Aladdin, who was initially overwhelmed. However, he remembered the lamp, rubbed it, and summoned the genie, stating, "The Sultan has broken his promise to me, and the vizier's son is to have the princess. My command is that tonight, you bring hither the bride and bridegroom." The genie obediently agreed. That night, at midnight, the genie transported the bed containing the vizier's son and the princess to Aladdin's chamber. Aladdin directed the genie to take the new bridegroom outside in the cold and return at daybreak. The genie complied, leaving Aladdin with the princess. Assuring her not to fear, Aladdin said, "You are my wife, promised to me by your unjust father, and no harm will come to you." The frightened princess remained silent, enduring the most miserable night of her life, while Aladdin slept soundly beside her. At the appointed hour, the genie brought in the shivering bridegroom, placed him back in bed, and transported the bed back to the palace. The next morning, the sultan came to wish his daughter good morning. The vizier's son, frightened, hid himself, and the princess, still sorrowful, refused to speak. The sultan sent her mother to inquire, and after hearing the princess's account, her mother dismissed it as an idle dream. The same scenario unfolded the following night. On the princess's continued silence the next morning, the sultan threatened to cut off her head. She then confessed all, instructing the sultan to ask the vizier's son, who admitted the truth. The sultan, deeply loving the princess, expressed that he would rather die than endure another fearful night and be separated from her. His wish was granted, and the feasting and rejoicing came to an end. When the 3 months were over, Aladdin sent his mother to remind the sultan of his promise. She stood in the same place as before, and the sultan, who had initially forgotten about Aladdin, suddenly recalled him and summoned her. Upon observing her poverty, the sultan felt even less inclined to keep his word and sought advice from his vizier. The vizier suggested setting an exceptionally high value on the princess, making it unlikely for anyone to meet the demand. The sultan then turned to Aladdin's mother and stated, "A sultan must remember his promises, and I will remember mine. However, your son must first send me 40 basins of gold, brimful of jewels, carried by 40 slaves, led by as many others splendidly dressed. Tell him that I await his answer." Aladdin's mother, fearing the worst, bowed low and returned home. She conveyed the message to Aladdin, adding her own skepticism about the sultan's willingness to wait for his response. However, Aladdin was confident and assured her, "Not so long, mother, as you think." He summoned the genie, and within moments, the 80 slaves arrived, filling up the small house and garden. Aladdin arranged for them to set out to the palace, 2 by 2, followed by his mother. The slaves, richly dressed and adorned with splendid jewels, attracted a crowd as they carried basins of gold on their heads. Upon entering the palace, the slaves knelt before the sultan, forming a half-circle around the throne with crossed arms. Aladdin's mother presented them to the sultan, who, no longer hesitating, said, "Good woman, return and tell your son that I wait for him with open arms." She promptly delivered the message to Aladdin. Aladdin wasted no time. He called upon the genie and requested a scented bath, a richly embroidered habit, a horse surpassing the sultan's, 20 slaves to attend him, 6 slaves beautifully dressed for his mother, and 10,000 pieces of gold in 10 purses. The genie fulfilled his requests, and Aladdin, mounted on his horse with the slaves strewing gold, made a grand entrance through the streets. Those who had played with him in childhood did not recognize him. He had grown remarkably handsome. When the sultan saw him, he descended from his throne, embraced Aladdin, and led him to a hall where a feast was spread, intending to marry him to the princess that very day. However, Aladdin declined, expressing the need to build a palace fitting for the princess. Once home, he instructed the genie to build a magnificent palace of the finest marble, adorned with precious stones. The palace was completed the next day, and the genie showcased every detail to Aladdin, from the velvet carpet leading to the Sultan's palace to the grand hall with its extraordinary features. Aladdin's mother, dressed elegantly, walked to the palace with her slaves, while Aladdin followed on horseback. The Sultan, appreciating the grandeur, sent musicians to meet them with trumpets and cymbals, creating a joyous atmosphere. The princess welcomed Aladdin's mother with great honor, and at night, she set out on the carpet for Aladdin's palace, accompanied by his mother and 100 slaves. Charmed by the sight of Aladdin, the princess willingly obeyed her father's wishes. After the wedding, Aladdin led her into the hall where a feast awaited them. They dined together and danced until midnight. The next day, Aladdin invited the Sultan to see the palace, and upon entering the hall with its magnificent windows, the Sultan marveled at the world wonder. Aladdin, addressing the unfinished window, explained that it was by design and intended for the Sultan to have the honor of finishing the palace. Pleased, the Sultan summoned the best jewelers in the city. He showed them the unfinished window and instructed them to fit it up like the others. The spokesperson of the jewelers replied, "Sir, we cannot find jewels enough," and the Sultan had his own jewels fetched. Despite their efforts, the work was only half done in a month. Realizing the futility of their task, Aladdin ordered them to undo their work and return the jewels. The genie then finished the window as per Aladdin's command. The Sultan, surprised to receive his jewels again, visited Aladdin, who showcased the finished window. The Sultan embraced him, but the envious vizier hinted that it was the work of enchantment. Aladdin had won the hearts of the people with his gentle bearing, becoming the captain of the Sultan's armies and winning several battles. Despite his victories, he remained as courteous as before, living in peace and content for several years. Meanwhile, far away in Africa, the magician remembered Aladdin's escape and discovered, through magic arts, that Aladdin had married a princess in great honor and wealth. Knowing the lamp's significance, the magician traveled tirelessly to the capital of China, bent on ruining Aladdin. As the magician passed through the town, he heard people talking about a marvelous palace raised by Prince Aladdin. Curious, he asked about the palace, and the reply was, "Have you not heard of Prince Aladdin's palace, the greatest wonder in the world?" The magician thanked the informant and, upon seeing the palace, realized it was raised by the genie of the lamp. Filled with rage, he vowed to get hold of the lamp and plunge Aladdin into poverty again. Unfortunately, Aladdin had gone hunting for 8 days, providing the magician ample time. The magician bought a dozen lamps, put them into a basket, and went to the palace crying, "New lamps for old," followed by a jeering crowd. The princess, sitting in the hall of 24 windows, sent a slave to find out the noise's cause. The slave, laughing, informed her about the old fool offering to exchange fine new lamps for old ones. Another slave pointed out the old lamp on the cornice, and the princess, unaware of its value, had the slave exchange it with the magician. The magician, having obtained the magic lamp, left the city gates and went to a lonely place, where he remained until nightfall. He rubbed the lamp, and the genie appeared, carrying him, the palace, and the princess to a lonely place in Africa. The next morning, the Sultan was astonished to find Aladdin's palace missing. Seeking an explanation, he sent for the vizier, who, too, was bewildered. Putting it down to enchantment, the Sultan sent 30 men on horseback to fetch Aladdin back in chains. They met Aladdin on his way home, bound him, and forced him to walk with them. The people, who loved him, followed armed to ensure his safety. Before the Sultan, Aladdin was ordered to be executed, but the vizier, seeing the crowd's threatening demeanor, called off the execution. The Sultan, influenced by the people, ordered Aladdin to be unbound and pardoned in front of the crowd. Aladdin, perplexed, begged to know his crime. The Sultan, in anger, pointed to the empty space where the palace had stood and demanded, "Where is your palace, and where is my daughter?" Aladdin, astonished, could not find words. The Sultan, more concerned about his daughter, demanded that Aladdin find her within 40 days or lose his head. Aladdin pleaded for the time, promising to return and face death if he failed. His request was granted, and he left the Sultan's presence sadly for 3 days. He wandered about like a madman, asking everyone about the fate of his palace, but they only laughed and pitied him. Eventually, he reached the banks of a river and knelt down to say his prayers before contemplating throwing himself in. In the midst of his despair, he absent-mindedly rubbed the ring he still wore, and to his surprise, the genie he had encountered in the cave appeared, asking his will. "Save my life, genie," implored Aladdin, "and bring my palace back." "That is not in my power," replied the genie. "I am only the slave of the ring. You must ask him of the lamp." "Even so," said Aladdin, "but you can take me to the palace and set me down under my dear wife's window." Instantly, he found himself in Africa under the princess's window, where sheer weariness overcame him, and he fell asleep. Awakened by the singing of birds, Aladdin's heart felt lighter, realizing that all his misfortunes were due to the loss of the lamp. He wondered in vain who had stolen it from him. On that morning, the princess rose earlier than usual, enduring the company of the magician forced upon her since being carried into Africa. As she dressed, one of her women saw Aladdin outside. The princess, delighted, opened the window, and Aladdin, upon hearing the noise, looked up. She called him to come to her, and their joy at seeing each other again was immense. After a kiss, Aladdin, before anything else, asked the princess about the old lamp he left on the cornice in the hall of 24 windows. "Alas," she said, "I am the innocent cause of our sorrows," and she narrated the story of the lamp exchange. Aladdin, realizing the magician's role, exclaimed, "Now I know that we have to thank the African magician for this. Where is the lamp?" "He carries it about with him," replied the princess, "for he pulled it out of his breast to show me. He wishes me to break my faith with you and marry him, claiming that you were beheaded by my father's command. He is forever speaking ill of you, but I only reply with my tears. If I persist, I doubt not that he will use violence." Aladdin comforted her and devised a plan. He changed clothes with a passer-by, purchased a certain powder, and returned to the princess. Advising her to dress beautifully and receive the magician with smiles, Aladdin instructed her to invite him to supper and express a desire to taste the wine of his country. The magician would go to fetch it, giving Aladdin the opportunity to tell her what to do. Following Aladdin's instructions, the princess dressed gaily for the first time since leaving China. She adorned herself with a girdle and headdress of diamonds, realizing her enhanced beauty in the mirror. As she received the magician, she surprised him by saying, "I have made up my mind that Aladdin is dead. and all my tears will not bring him back to me. So, I am resolved to mourn no more, and have therefore invited you to sup with me. But I am tired of the wines of China, and would fain taste those of Africa." The magician hurried to his cellar, and the princess discreetly placed the powder Aladdin had given her in her cup. Upon his return, she proposed they drink to her health in the wine of Africa, exchanging her cup for his as a sign of reconciliation. Before drinking, the magician praised her beauty, but she urged him to drink first. As he drained his cup to the dregs, he fell back lifeless. Aladdin, who had entered after the deed, went to the dead magician, took the lamp from his vest, and commanded the genie to carry the palace and all in it back to China. The princess, in her chamber, felt only 2 little shocks and little realized she was home again. Meanwhile, the sultan, mourning for his lost daughter, saw the palace reappear. He hastened there, and Aladdin received him in the hall of the 24 windows. With the princess at his side, Aladdin narrated to the sultan what had transpired and showed him the lifeless body of the magician for confirmation. A 10-day feast was announced, and it appeared as if Aladdin might finally live the remainder of his life in tranquility. However, fate had other plans. The deceased magician's younger brother, even more wicked and cunning, sought revenge for his brother's demise. He traveled to China with the intention of seeking assistance from a pious woman named Fatima. Upon entering her abode, the evil brother threatened Fatima's life with a dagger, coercing her to comply with his commands. He exchanged clothes with her, disguised himself as the holy woman, and cruelly murdered her to eliminate any witnesses. Veiled as Fatima, he proceeded towards Aladdin's palace, where the people, assuming he was the revered woman, gathered around, seeking blessings and kissing his hands. Amid the commotion, the princess, curious about the disturbance, sent her slave to inquire. The slave conveyed that the holy woman was supposedly curing people by her touch. Intrigued, the princess, who had long wished to meet Fatima, summoned her to the palace. In the princess's presence, the magician, still disguised, offered a prayer for her well-being. Pleased with his supposed holiness, the princess invited him to stay with her permanently. The impostor agreed, maintaining his veil to avoid detection. The princess then showed him the hall, and he remarked that it lacked only one thing, the egg of a mythical giant bird known as the roc. The princess became fixated on obtaining a roc's egg for the hall, and when Aladdin returned from hunting, he found her in a foul mood. Inquiring about her distress, the princess expressed her dissatisfaction, explaining that the absence of a roc's egg hanging from the dome ruined her enjoyment of the hall. Aladdin, determined to bring happiness to his wife, assured her that the situation could be rectified. He left her side, rubbed the lamp, and summoned the genie. Instructing the genie to fetch a roc's egg, Aladdin's command provoked a loud and terrible shriek from the genie. "Wretch!" the genie exclaimed, expressing his frustration at being commanded to bring his master and hang him in the dome. He criticized Aladdin, his wife, and the palace, claiming they deserved to be burnt to ashes. The genie clarified that this request originated from the brother of the African magician Aladdin had defeated, who was now disguised as the holy woman in the palace. Alarmed by this revelation, Aladdin returned to the princess, feigning a headache and requesting the presence of the holy Fatima to lay her hands on him. However, when the impostor approached, Aladdin, quick to defend himself, seized his dagger and fatally pierced the wicked magician's heart. Shocked, the princess questioned Aladdin's actions, believing he had killed the holy woman. Aladdin clarified that he had slain a wicked magician, unveiling the deception that had taken place. Following this revelation, Aladdin and his wife lived in peace. Aladdin succeeded the Sultan after his demise, reigning for many years and leaving behind a legacy of kings. That's the end of today's story. I hope you'll listen to this and fall into a deep sleep. If you enjoyed tonight's story, please like, subscribe, and share this for us before you go to bed. Sleep tight, dream big, and may your night be filled with the most sweet dreams. Good night, my friends.